Welcome back to the Canine Campus Podcast. This is episode 24, and today we're going to be talking about Leave It. Devin, welcome back. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, and yourself?
I'm doing very well, thanks. Before we get to our main topic, which I was fortunate enough to learn a bit about in an obedience class at Canine Campus yesterday, we've got a lot of listener messages to get through. Devin, why don't you start us off with some emails that you got?
Okay. The first email that I got was from Beth. So her question was, how long do you pair a clicker with a treat? At what point can you fade the treat when you click? And that's actually a really good question. This comes up a lot in training, and it's one of the kind of most common misunderstandings about the clicker. Mm-hmm. You always pair the clicker with a reward. It's not that you fade the use of rewards with the clicker. It's that you fade the use of the clicker altogether.
Right. Okay.
So clickers or event markers of any kind are used when you are first teaching a new behavior, the first, let's say, 15 to 30 trials.
Right.
And at that point, every correct response gets a reward. It doesn't have to be a treat, but you click and there is a reward. Mm-hmm. After the first 15 to 30 trials, when the dog is catching on, you can then move to an intermittent schedule of reinforcement, and you no longer need to use a clicker.
Right.
Now, for a behavior like sit, let's say you're not using the clicker at all at home because your dog knows it and they're doing it fairly reliably. The first time you start working in distractions, you might want to bring it out again for the first few trials because in the midst of distractions, it can clarify things for dogs. Mm-hmm. So the clicker is never to be used without some reward. It doesn't have to be a food reward, but there needs to be a reward. But the design of an event marker is when you're teaching a new behavior, it's not really intended to be used for the life of the behavior.
Great. Good question. Thank you.
And Beth also had another really good question. When her dogs come when called, she would like them to sit and or down at the completion of the recall. And her question was, when I'm first teaching recall, and her dog, I believe from her email, kind of had a sketchy recall. And Beth, we've all been there.
Yeah, right.
As Stace and I can attend to yesterday, out screaming in the woods for our two little culprits, the husky and the silly boom boom, who were not coming when called.
Right.
Of course, the other two, the younger ones, who we by then had really made all the mistakes and actually knew more of what we were doing, came like dreams. But
didn't they?
Not the older ones.
Mm-hmm.
They are back, though, safely. So here's what happens. A reward is for the last 3 seconds of behavior. And the click can mark a reward, but you can really muddy the waters if you try to teach complex behavior simultaneously.
Right.
So I have a number of clients who want a sit at the end of a recall and taught that right up front. And they didn't understand why their recall was so sketchy. But boy, their sit was excellent. And that was because they were really rewarding the sit, not the recall. So what I tell people is, when you're first teaching recall, don't teach anything else. They come to you, they get a treat. They come to you, they get a treat. Once their recall is reliable, this might take a week, this might take a month. It depends on how often you practice. Then when they come, reward the recall and ask them for something after it, like a sit. Now, if they already know sit, you don't have to reward that. You can say, good dog, what a good decision. Mm-hmm. Likewise with down. But again, recall is the top priority behavior in that sequence. After you do that for 20, 30 trials, you can start recalling, good dog, sit. Okay, now here's your treat. And so then you can start moving where the actual treat is. But teach this behavior, the recall behavior, in and of itself, and wait until it's reliable before you try to make a complex behavior out of it.
Gotcha.
So thank you, Beth. Those were both excellent
another great
questions.
question. Yeah.
Then we had an email from CJ, who has a rescued Dobie, and she wanted to encourage us in her first email to me to focus on our training message and to try to be mindful of not criticizing or bringing up the training methods of other people, particularly if they are not similar to our own. And I appreciated that comment, because there is no doubt that there are times when my frustration regarding the continued popularity and use and promotion of dominance theory, despite all the really solid scientific evidence that shows it to be completely untrue, that frustration has spilled over in previous podcasts to proponents of dominance theory, and many training strategies that use force and intimidation, they're based on that.
Right.
So I appreciated her sort of keeping us on our toes and asking us to really keep our message true to us, and not be sidetracked by these other distractions.
Yeah, the comments appreciated, and it. I guess this is all in the context of the last 3 episodes that we did, which were on punishment dominance theory and some statement from veterinary experts about the ineffectiveness of those approaches in most circumstances.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a good point, and we definitely will be sticking with the positive message, but thanks for the note. We appreciate any comments, any criticism, whatever makes this a better show. Please keep it coming.
She then wrote back and talked about having success with a negative punishment. And we've done a show on negative punishment, and that's when you remove something valuable to the dog, remove something from the environment when your dog makes a mistake.
Right.
And she found that her dog, if he did not comply with a cue in a sort of timely fashion, she was afraid that he had not understood what she was trying to do. So rather than removing herself, she sort of tried to help more. And so she has now changed that strategy. And when she asks for a particular behavior, if she does not get it, she walks away. And this has great, she said she almost had immediate results. And now her Dobie is reliably sitting in order to come through the door, and also reliably sitting to get his leash on. So it's really powerful. Removing yourself is really powerful, and I'm so glad she got to experience that. She also pointed out she had gone to the American Society of Veterinary Behaviorists website to look up what we had referenced in the past few shows, and she had found another training strategy on their website. I think they say nothing in life is free. We call it no free lunch. We've talked about it in the past, and she's now integrating that with great success into her training too. So that was terrific. Go CJ. And then we had a really kind of delightful email from Susan from Nova Scotia, who is new to clicker training, and she was somewhat confused about, or not confused, she didn't know how long training sessions should be, what they should entail. No book seemed to mention this. I pointed out that Pat Miller's book, The Power of Positive Dog Training, kind of has a dog training chart in it that can help you. But one of the reasons why this is not specified in a lot of books is it's really dependent upon the dog. It's dependent upon the dog's personality. For example, our husky does not like repetition at all. She gets bored very quickly. So we can only do a couple of trials of a particular behavior before we move on to another one. There are other dogs, our hounds are a good example of this, who will work on one behavior with us endlessly. So that changes the makeup of a training session. So what I recommend to everyone is 5 to 10 minute training sessions. Set the oven timer, because if you don't, you're going to keep training till your training falls apart, and then you're ending on a low note. So if you set it for 5 or 10 minutes, make sure you end on a success. If the timer goes off and you're in the middle of something and it's not going well, ask your dog to do something really simple, something they do really well. End the session there. 2 to 10 training sessions a day. If you have the time, it's up to you. And think about incorporating play into your training sessions, because that can really help. If the reward you're using is play, that can definitely give them a break, make them able to do more trials. We spend a lot of time taking our husky outside for walks and sniffs in between training sessions, so she gets a break. So also, Susan is keeping a journal, which I think is a great idea. I think that it's really easy to forget how much progress you've made, where you've started, where you've gone. And a training journal can really help you with that.
Yeah, and I noticed in our class yesterday, the dog that I was working with, Roomba, after a while she got a little bored, and I noticed it's a formal part of your class layout that after we do some drilling, we take a few minutes to jolly up the dogs, to kind of just mellow things out.
Right, I get dogs' tails to wag. I really recommend tugging. But again, if you're doing this throughout the training sessions, that can make for a longer training session. And I also want to point out, we've said this before, Pat Miller has a great quote: in every interaction with your dog, either you are being trained or your dog is. So you don't even actually need formal training sessions. If every time you're interacting with your dog, you're asking for something, you're setting a precedent, you're training all the time. And, as I tell people, try to come out ahead 51% of the time as the trainer.
There you go. There you go.
Because my dog's trained me, and I'm totally cool with that. But 51%. And actually, Susan's dog is training her by going into the training room and lying down and waiting for her to come in and train.
Smart dog.
So there's nothing like a thinking dog, and positive training will get you there. So that was the viewer mail that came my way.
Great. And we also got a bunch of comments and questions from our Facebook page. We don't have time to go through all of them today, but we encourage all of you to look for Canine Campus if you're on Facebook, or to join Facebook and find the Canine Campus group. There's a discussion forum that's starting to sprout some really interesting conversations. We got some really interesting insights from Sue on shaping. Sue, thanks for sharing your experience, because we're going to be dedicating an entire episode to shaping in the next few weeks, but it was interesting to hear some of her frustrations and then kind of the successes she realized once she moved past those. So we're going to dig deep into that probably in our next episode, actually. We got some really nice comments from Lindsay, Lori, Helen, Susan, a bunch of other people. And lastly, we got a phone call from Lynn in Milton, Wisconsin with a question about meatballs. Let's play that really quickly. Lastly, we got a phone call from Lynn in Milton, Wisconsin with a question about meatballs.
Hi, this is Lynn from Milton, Wisconsin, and just wanted to call and say that I really enjoy your podcast, and I was wondering if you would be willing to share on the website or on your podcast your meatball recipe. I'm an assistant with Dog's Best Friend, and I just thought it would be a great addition to the treats, especially for the Drop It lesson. I think having probably your meatballs, which sound wonderful, would trump pretty much any toy. So if you would be willing to share that, that would be great. And thanks again for spreading the word about positive training. Bye.
So, Devin, what's the secret recipe? Everybody calls you the meatball lady in classes.
I wish I had a secret recipe. I don't make them. I buy them.
Right.
They are human meatballs that you can get frozen at any major and even smaller grocery store. The ones that we buy, we happen to get a large sort of wholesale chain. They're sort of different in every area. But they're great because they're frozen, so you can grab a handful. And obviously, I teach so many classes, I'm defrosting a lot of meatballs. But then if in between times, if you're not using them while they're frozen, then they don't go bad. So, and I want to say this. One meatball can last all day. People treat way too big. So I pinch off a bare lick of meatball yumminess.
Well, we were speaking yesterday about frequency being more important than quantity, correct?
Right. Quantity is we were talking about that in the context of jackpots. Quantity is actually irrelevant to the dog. Duration of a treat is what matters. And so people...
Duration, not frequency. Sorry.
So people often say to me, well, my dog's going to get so fat if I train this way. And it's like, no, they're not. I mean, I literally, in an hour-long class, can use one meatball with a dog. But it also helps if I don't just use a meatball. I also have a few other treats that I use as well, so that there's some variety. And don't use those at home. It's a waste and a low distraction environment. Those are powerful, powerful rewards. Save them for highly distracting and challenging environments.
They are. And I think another thing that's interesting about how you prepare them, Devin, is you generally kind of thaw them out on the way to, in the microwave before class at a very low level, so that they're still almost partially frozen by the time you get to class. These aren't cooked. They're not prepared. I mean, they come cooked.
They come fully cooked.
So it's,
all I'm trying to do is thaw them, not heat them.
And if you do heat them, they get really kind of nasty.
Well, they get greasy,
really
and then
greasy.
it's all over your hand.
Yeah. So,
and if they're partially frozen, you have to pinch off a little bit less, which I
makes
think
them
is
easier
helpful.
to deal with.
Yeah.
Makes them easier to deal with. So, Lynn, we hope that answers your question. Let us know. Let us know how that works out for you. But you can find those. We get them at Sam's Club. You can get them in Costco. They're in big bags in the bulk fruit.
And for those of you that don't go to
areas.
those kind of places, I've yet to find, even our little teeny grocery store in town has them.
Yeah. Right.
So,
yeah.
I mean, in smaller bags, but still has them. It's in the frozen section.
Great, excellent. And then we'll close off our viewer mail section with a note on a topic that was started on the Facebook discussion forum titled "Pet Loss in a Pack." We got a really nice note from Deborah in Philadelphia, who unfortunately was faced with some unexpected loss in her pack. And Deborah, first, we're sorry to hear about that, and we hope we can help you with that. One of the many challenges that comes with that, if you're in a pack, as Deborah noted, was it seems to be having a really tough impact on not only the humans in the household, but the other dogs. And so one of the one of the problems that Deborah's experiencing with her pack is that the dogs used to kind of wait for the other dog to finish her dinner. And she uses the term alpha dog, which is something we've talked a lot about. We're not going to go into that right now. But there seems to be kind of a negative impact on the other dog's willingness to eat, things of that nature. Devin, did you have any thoughts on that? And before we do answer that question, we encourage all of the listeners to participate in this Facebook discussion forum. We know pet loss, having experienced a lot of it, is a really difficult thing. And this is one of the great places where a community can come together to kind of help each other out. So please do feel free to participate in that discussion. And in the meantime, while we look forward to hearing everybody's comments on our Facebook page about that, Devin, did you have any thoughts about the other dogs and kind of their slow recovery from this whole process?
Well, first, Deborah, our hearts go out to you. It's a very challenging adjustment for everyone, as Stace pointed out. And Patricia McConnell has actually written some lovely articles on this. In almost all of her books, Animals and Emotions has something on it too. She also wrote what I thought was a lovely article in, I believe it was Dogwise magazine. There's an interesting study that was done, I believe in Europe, on mares who lost their foals. Mm-hmm. And what they found was if the mares were allowed to hang out with their foals, with the body of their foals, for a certain amount of time, they seemed to be able to process that grief in a more timely fashion, right, and kind of move on. And as a result of this study, versus the other mares, when the foal was immediately removed, they sought it out. They were still searching for it. They were still displaying a lot of stress behaviors. As a result of this, Patricia McConnell actually brings or lays the bodies of her lost dogs. For some people that this is possible or it's comfortable for them. Right. Patricia McConnell actually has a vet that comes to her house and euthanizes her dogs there, and she has them out in the living room overnight so all the other dogs can grieve. And what's interesting is her observations about some dogs really seem to notice it, and it affects them. Other dogs kind of don't give it the time of day. Some other dogs avoid that room altogether. Right. But obviously, that's a pretty tough concept. Right. I'm not sure that I could do it. And Patricia doesn't suggest, by the way, that you do this. She just has this as sort of an option. So, in the meantime, what I recommend is to let them all grieve. And if you can, I find that having structured one-on-one time with each of the dogs throughout the day, that can be a 20-minute walk, one-on-one, not all the dogs together. Yeah. When you leave the other dogs at home, when you're doing something structured with one dog, make sure they have something fabulous. They've got a stuffed Kong. If you feel that when you take one out, it stresses the other dogs because they're like, oh, is that dog coming back? Then by all means, you can work with more than one dog. But I think it can even be a training session in another room where, the dogs are gated off and can see it but aren't in there. But having that, it's always tough to find a new normal, and there's always a major shift in packs, and you're never really sure how much impact any animal has on a pack until they're gone. And we had kind of the matriarch of our clan was actually a cat.
Right, yeah.
Smilla was a phenomenal matriarch, and we lost her unexpectedly as well. And it was a tough adjustment for the cats and the dogs. I mean, she really kind of, was our matriarch. So give them all time. I wouldn't be overly concerned about they're not really eating right now. You might want to make their food a little extra special. And again, I would definitely put it in a food toy so they have something that occupies them. If you can increase their exercise and their mental exercise, which is what a food toy does, that helps flood their system with really good chemicals, the chemicals that make them feel a little better. That's why, nice walks, some play sessions. And I think it really helps to grieve together. I think it's a really powerful experience, and I think it's actually a lovely testament to the dog that was.
Right.
It should matter.
Yeah.
It should impact the pack. How lovely.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you for that, Devin, and thank you for your note and for opening up the forum to that conversation. I think a lot of people will have experiences to share, and we encourage everybody to do that. If you do want to drop us an email or drop us a phone call or get a message to us, you have a question, we really look forward to hearing it. It really makes this podcast happen. You can email us at podcast@caninecampus.com. You can visit us on the website where you can leave a voicemail on our homepage at www.caninecampus.com. And if you're old-fashioned, you can reach us on the telephone. Leave us a message on our message line at area code 434-973-1050. That's area code 434-973-1050. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Leave It here on the Canine Campus Podcast. Welcome back to the Canine Campus Podcast. Today we're talking about Leave It. Devin, why don't you kick us off on the main topic here?
Okay. First I want to differentiate the Leave It cue from give or drop. And you might recall that we covered that cue. Yeah,
actually I just took a look. We did give and drop it in the resource guarding episode of the Canine Campus Podcast. That was actually episode number 13 that we did back in June 2007. I know, I had no idea we've been doing this for over 2 years. But
and with a fabulous picture of our husky.
Right, who is fantastic at Leave It and give and drop
to
it.
us, but she's a total greedy gut with the other dogs.
Exactly. So what's the difference? I mean, give and drop. It's when the dog has something and you right. issue that cue and their mouth opens up. So you use
give or drop it when the dog already has possession of something and you would like them to cede possession.
Right.
You use Leave It to prevent them from taking possession at all.
Okay, so this is something that they've identified, and it's easy to tell when your dog sees something it wants.
This is like, ooh, there's an object of interest, and it's like, and you're not going to touch it.
And you will be mine. Yes.
So that's the first thing. This is different than give or drop it. This means don't touch it at all. And there's a couple of basic sort of training strategies that I use. Again, this is personal preference, and this can be, it's up to the individual trainer, but I just bring these up in my classes so people have things to think about. The first one is I never reward with the Leave It object. So there are some people and some trainers that teach Leave It and Take It.
Right.
And I think that's wonderful. If you want to teach or train your dog to that level of control, that's great. I work with the average person, and the average person is in my class for 6 weeks, and I'm not going to see them again.
Right.
And so I want a really solid Leave It. I find that if you never treat with the Leave It object, it prevents the building of anticipation. So dogs that have been taught Leave It, Take It, that I've seen in my classes, and again, these are your basic obedience people, they're waiting to be told to take it. They're waiting to be told to take it. They're waiting for their moment.
There's a second part of it.
They're waiting for that moment, and if it doesn't come at some point, there is a good chance that they will take it on their own. And since the vast majority of Leave It objects, my dogs are never going to get anyway. I mean, when I say Leave It to broken glass, or I say Leave It to a rotting, piece of food on the sidewalk.
Or a spilled bottle of aspirin.
Right. They're never going to get it.
Right.
And this also means that when I put down a plate of hors d'oeuvres on our living room table and I say Leave It, I don't have to stand guard.
Right.
My dogs know, I'm never going to get that.
Right.
That's just never going to happen. So that's something to think about.
And believe it or not, this is possible. this really does work.
Oh, it works like a charm.
Yeah.
There's also make sure that when you're first training this, the reward you're using is more high value than what you're asking them to leave. So when you first teach this behavior, you don't want to use their absolute all-time favorite whatever. You want to start, I usually start with a boring biscuit.
As the thing they're going to leave.
As the thing they're going to leave, and I'm rewarding with meatballs or other goodies for leaving it. And people will say to me, well, Devin, I mean, if you're using a dog biscuit and you just said you never reward with the leave it object, do I have to throw out all my dog biscuits? And the answer to that is no.
Yeah.
What I mean by they don't get the leave it object, they don't get it in the training session. That doesn't mean that they can't get it a few hours later or even 25 minutes later, well beyond the session when it's no longer identified by the dog as the leave it object. Okay. Also, when you're training this, the dog must be able to reach the leave it object. So I have some people that tether their dog and ask their dog to leave it and step 3 feet out of the range of the dog.
Right, which feels like guaranteed success.
Right, but your dog's not learning anything. It can't reach it anyway.
Right, exactly.
So that's not a leave it. So that's just something else to think about. Another thing, too, actually, I'll bring this up at the end of the podcast. Remind me to bring up Susan Garrett. Okay, now, I also break kind of a bit of a cardinal rule of training when I teach leave it.
Yeah.
And that is I build duration into it right from the get-go.
Okay.
So normally there's the 3 Ds in dog training: distance, durations, and distractions. And you add those one at a time well after the behavior is initially established.
So you get your distance first. Then you would go back to really short distances.
It doesn't matter which of
duration.
those 3 Ds. Like those Ds can come in any order. But yeah, you introduce them one at a time.
You
and then
build
you
up
compound
one and
them.
then move back and start over with the next
exactly.
one. Okay.
So I build duration into this right from the get-go because I don't want a dog that leaves it for a nanosecond, gets a treat, and then goes back to it.
Right.
Again, that's a problem for
Duration
me.
is, well, obviously kind of one of the most important components of this then.
Right. So for my leave it, I start working in 30 to 45 second leave it segments, meaning I issue one leave it cue, and that covers 30 to 45 seconds. I tend to use 30 seconds for puppies and younger dogs that have a much smaller attention span, 45 seconds for the average adolescent dog or older. So here's how it goes. I usually have the dog tethered just so my hands are free, not to prevent the dog from getting the object.
Right.
I show them the boring old biscuit. I put it right in front of them and say, right in front of their nose in my hand, this is the treats, the biscuit's still in my hand. I show it to them. I ask them to leave it once and only once. And then I put it under my foot. Now, at this point, I just sit and wait.
Because they know it's there.
Right. That's why I've shown it to them.
Right.
So they can dig at my foot, which a lab or a golden retriever often will do. Although yesterday I had a Jack Russell that just would not give up. I mean, he was just the cutest little thing. He's in puppy class. And I just wait. And the second they remove their attention, I mark it, click or yes, and treat. So
this more, as much as so many other kind of initial attempts, it's a waiting game.
It's a waiting game, and I don't help them. And it's critical you don't help. Don't say your dog's name. Don't issue an interrupter. Don't do anything. You said leave it, put it under. This is actually a perfect Skinner box. Right? I've asked for a cue. If you try to get it, you're not going to get it anyway. So I'm just going to sit here and relax. But if you try something else, like not actively trying to get it, that is going to pay off for you.
Yeah.
So in a 45-second range, I never say leave it again, but I mark and reward every time the dog's attention leaves the object. Now, if the dog sort of starts catching on and just sits and looks at me, I reward that because they are, in fact, leaving it. So the dog doesn't have to go for it to give it up to get rewarded, because then you're actually teaching them to go for it to give it up.
Right.
Remember, this behavior is not touching it, not acknowledging it. So when they are doing that, if they're just sitting politely and staring at me, good dog, good dog, good dog, here's a treat, good dog. And so as the dog catches on, you can start fading the rewards and replacing treats with verbal praise. What's critical is that the dog isn't left in a vacuum. So in other words, you've been clicking and treating pretty regularly, and then now you're starting to fade the clicks and the treats, and you're not saying anything. Well, then you get a dog that starts guessing. well, maybe it's sit, maybe it's down.
Right.
I don't
Starts
know.
throwing other behaviors.
Right, because I'm not. So I always give feedback when I start feeding treats. Good dog. That's what I'm looking for.
Right.
Hang in there. So basically, and then at the end of 45 seconds, I pick up the object and I start again. Show it to them. Ask for a leave it under my foot. Clicking and treating or marking and treating whenever they take attention off of it. Longer periods of time, lots of verbal praises, they start catching on. And at this point, I start taking my foot off the object. Now, this is critical. Don't just walk away from the object.
Right.
Pivot on your heel so that you unveil the object. And if the dog makes a move for it, do not repeat the cue.
Right. This isn't leave it. It's
And I'm going to actually repeat that cue.
leave it.
Do not repeat the cue. Just step on it again.
Yeah.
Right? Just prevent them from getting it. And start working the foot. Lots of rewards. I mean, you can really teach this in like 5 trials. If your timing's good, it's amazing how quickly dogs pick this up.
Right.
So here's the goal. The goal is 1 leave it in a 45-second span. The first 4 or 5 trials, there's going to be lots of rewarding in that 45 seconds, be it verbal praise, be it treats. As they start catching on, you start fading the rewards. So over, let's say you practice this a couple of times a day. Over the course of a week to 10 days, you've got 1 leave it cue, 45 seconds of leave it, and 1 tangible reward at the end of it, with lots of verbal praise in between. At that point, you start building duration. My goal is to have a 3-minute leave it. And what that means is the cue is issued once at the beginning of it. There is 3 minutes of leave it and 1 tangible reward at the end. But when you start increasing duration, don't go from 45 seconds to 3 minutes. You go from 45 seconds to a minute.
Right.
Then to a minute and 15 seconds. So you just sort of slowly build it up. And remember,
timers are really handy for this kind of thing.
they are, and go backwards too. So if you get a really good minute and a half leave it, go back and ask for a 20-second one. Be random. It's like stay. Be random. It really helps.
Right.
And also, something to make note of, be mindful of how you issue the cue. So I always find this is really interesting in class because if people are teaching a trick, they're like, oh, shake, and they're all animated and fun, and oh, spin. But the second they say leave it, they're like, leave it.
Yeah.
I mean, they sound like a drill sergeant. And what they're doing is interrupting, right? They've just issued an interrupter, so their dog's like, wow, that was a pretty strict tone of voice. I'm not going to budge.
Right.
So they're stopping because of the tone of voice, but not because they've learned the cue.
Right.
Leave it is like sit. It's like come.
Stay.
It's like shake. It's conversational. And if you've taught them what those words mean, you don't need to put it. So the people that use leave it as an interrupter are the people that haven't actually taught their dog what the cue means.
Right. Right.
So keep that in mind.
And as we've discussed, it's a lot easier on you, the human, to be able to issue these cues lightly than have to scream and yell them. It's very stressful.
It's stressful for everyone.
Stressful for everybody.
And you also need to generalize the leave it object. So as your dog catches on, what you're asking them to leave can start being of slightly higher value, things you actually need them to leave. Also, think about, there's a reason why I start with a biscuit, because if you try to step on a meatball,
it's pretty nasty.
it's kind of nasty, and it grounds into the ground. And so you choose your leave it objects wisely. Think also about what you actually want to teach your dog to leave. I have some people that are like, oh, great, I'm going to use this for shoes. I have a puppy, I'm going to use this for shoes. That puts the responsibility on you to be present, to issue the cue every time.
Right.
So
another case where management might be a better...
And we've talked about this in and actually the same podcast, the Resource Guarding podcast you referenced earlier. If when you have a puppy and they have something inappropriate, you constantly trade them for something appropriate. Over months, and this takes 6-7 months, they start discriminating. They start realizing, boy, whenever I pick up that loafer, I always have to give it up for the rawhide. I'm just going to go for the rawhide first. That seems to be something I can keep longer.
Right.
This goes back to how important duration is. It's like, boy, I don't get that for very long, but I get that rawhide for a really long time. So I'm just going to start going there first. So that's something else to think about. Also, The kind of leave it I just described is a stationary leave it. And what I mean by that is the leave it object is stationary. And for the most part, the dog is, they're kind of moving it, but it's in a small range. Yeah. This is totally different than walk by leave it. So what I mean by a walk by leave it is dog is on leash walking with you.
Which is an essential part of the Delta Society therapy dog test, correct?
Yes, it is. It's an essential component of a number of therapy tests. And I just want to say, get your stationary leave it reliable. Before you move to the walk by leave it, which I'm going to talk about briefly.
All right.
And what I mean by reliable is you can throw a biscuit on the ground, say leave it, and your dog doesn't even go near it.
Right.
That is a reliable stationary leave it.
Great.
And with the walk by leave it, this is actually a new behavior. You remember, dogs don't generalize well, and you're completely changing the context. Now I'm on the move, on the leash with you. So what happens, people are a little overconfident, and they walk sort of right up to the leave it object. They ask their dog to leave it. Their dog has no idea what they're talking about because leave it has never occurred like this before. The dog goes for it. The person panics because they're standing right next to it and jerks the leash.
Right.
There's a lot of dogs that think leave it is a precursor to a leash jerk. So this is critical, and I describe this. I demo it, so I show everyone in class how it should go, and yet at least half the class does exactly what I just described, getting too close and pulling the leash. You want to pretend there is an invisible force field around that leave it object. And again, when you start doing walk-bys, go back to the boring biscuit, make sure you have a higher value reward. So what I mean by that 3-foot force field is if your dog sees the leave it object and goes for it, at the end of their leash, fully stretched out, and what I mean is don't release the leash to let it, I bunch leashes up in my hand so my dog gets a couple of foot of the leash. But if they're at the end of the leash, they are still 3 feet away from that object. They can't reach it, which prevents you from having to tug back against them. Right. So I start walking. If my dog notices the object, I say leave it and stop walking and wait for them to leave it.
Okay.
I don't say anything. Just like the other stationary, I don't talk, I don't do it. I just stand there. And even if they're pulling at the end of the leash to get to it, I don't care because I'm 3 feet away.
Right.
They can't reach it. At some point, they're like, hey. And sometimes they'll look at you. Sometimes they'll look away. I mark that, click or treat, or click. And then I start walking again as I treat them, so they're getting something else to focus on the treat while we get a little distance from the reward so they don't go back for it. Now, let me say this. If they do go back for it, I do not issue the cue again. There's one leave it for each walk by. If they go back to it, I stop walking and I wait. And when they give it up, I give them verbal praise and I walk on. So there's only one cue. And there's only one reward. If they go back multiple times, I'll stop, I'll wait, I'll give them verbal feedback when they make a good decision. But that's it, because I don't want to teach a dog, leave it, get a treat, go back for it, leave it, get a treat, go back for it.
Right. This is one leave it, and one leave it lasts a long, long time.
It lasts for the pass of that particular object.
Gotcha.
And I also have clients that tend to try to hustle their dog past it.
Sure, yeah.
Again, that's not teaching leave it. That's teaching, there's something valuable there and I'm going to try to rush you past it. I really stop and let them make the decision. And as they start catching on, you can start increasing the value of the leave it object, slightly decreasing or decreasing your distance from the leave it object. If you're decreasing distance, remember to keep using a low value object. So
gotcha.
I think that it's really important to let your dog learn this. It's really powerful when they learn it. And the best way to teach them this is to set them up so that they can only succeed and then let them figure it out.
Right. Right, exactly. And, I mentioned the therapy dog test that I'm familiar with having to learn this for. One of the things that was interesting to me when I learned it was that it was in the context of there can be some really dangerous things in a dog's environment that you're not going to be able to use a leash for to get them away from, or they may be, the leash may slip out of your hands, but there could be drugs, there could be something sharp, there could be something toxic. And this is an amazing tool to have in your toolkit for the safety of your dog.
Well, and really dogs that, going back to the therapy dog test, in the therapy dog test, when you, on the leave it exercise, at least in the Delta Society, your leash cannot go taut.
Right.
So it's not the leash that prevents them from getting it. It's the knowledge of the cue.
Right.
And so in the learning phases, your leash obviously will be taut. That's part of the learning. But dogs that really know this think they're being set up when you say leave it.
Yeah.
And you can see it in
It's
these
great.
tests when the people issue the leave it cue and they think, oh, right, there's no way that plate of bacon's down here for me.
Yeah.
There's no way I'm going to get that.
But there's probably a meatball in my future.
And you can't actually use rewards on the therapy dog test, but by then your dog should know leave it well enough that you're not rewarding for every correct leave it anyway.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm.
There's also, I think it's important to point out, there's an entirely different philosophy about this. Mm-hmm. This is a Susan Garrett philosophy, and we've talked about her in the past. She has a wonderful website, and she's actually now got an amazing blog. I mean, it's really, really
Cool.
And
And we'll link to that in the show notes.
I didn't poo-poo it, but my friend and amazing trainer Patty loves it. But she does performance, and she has performance dogs, and I'm not a performance person, and so I thought that the podcast would be much more geared towards sort of heavy duty performance, and that's not it. There's just great ideas, and it's just a lovely podcast. But I'm sorry, blog. But her philosophy, she actually tragically lost a dog to a pill in a hotel room that she didn't know was there. Like it was for previous renter, tenants.
Previous occupants
medication. And the dog did not die immediately. It was like a year of not good stuff. Yeah. So she teaches her dogs, and Patty does this too. It's kind of phenomenal, that you don't touch anything on the ground unless I tell you to.
Wow.
So in puppyhood, and Patty was doing this in my puppy class the other day, she puts down a biscuit, and if the dog goes for it, she just covers it with her hand. Mm-hmm. And she takes her hand off and covers it with her hand. And at some point, some of the time, she will say, take it. And sometimes she won't. Now, I want to point out to everyone, I know this sounds like a great idea. I personally think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
This, however, requires that your dog, your puppy, never successfully gets anything on the ground without your permission.
Pretty rigorous.
And I mean, Susan Garrett is known for the immaculate and precise structure she builds for her dogs, and it's hugely admirable.
Yeah.
I find that I fall well short of that mark. That's me and my foibles and my imperfections as a trainer. Patty's definitely closer to it than I am. Yeah. And so, that is definitely something to consider, especially if you have a young puppy. Like maybe that's the road you want to go down. And I would really encourage visiting Susan's website. She's got the great blog. She's got some great videos and books too.
Great. And we'll have links to those on our show notes. This is all great information. Leave it. It can save your dog's life. It can just make your life a lot easier and a lot more pleasant.
I'm thinking of the time that our husky, on the first road trip we took her on, got a partially eaten and someone threw an enchilada out the window, I think.
Yeah.
And it was like disgusting and moldy. And we're staying in a hotel, and she had the worst gastric disturbances from this event.
And we wish we had known leave it at that point.
She was a young puppy.
Yeah.
And I didn't even see it until she got it. But we basically were walking this dog. We were up walking this dog. Do you remember every hour?
Every hour. I do remember that.
And then we lost hotel power, which made, going out in the middle of the night in a place you don't know where you are with your dog that's sick.
Yeah.
It was not fun.
At the worst, it can save you from some really inconvenient situations. At best, it can save your dog's life. But this has been a great conversation. We've been talking about Leave It on the Canine Campus podcast. Thank you again for all the letters and emails
all the
and
feedback.
Phone calls, all the feedback. Really
We're
helpful.
about feedback.
Keep it coming. And if you do have a question for us, the number is area code 434-973-1050. You can visit us on the internet at www.caninecampus.com. Check out our Facebook group and participate in those conversations, because that's part of what this is all about, is getting the community to work with each other. And so just go to Facebook, type in Canine Campus, and the group will come up. Next time, we're going to be talking about shaping on the Canine Campus podcast. If you have questions and particular experiences you'd like to share, please send those along as well. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you in a few weeks.
Happy training.